Ah, there I am. My goodness, I've suddenly arrived in view. I've scared myself there. That's fine. Right, well, welcome to the session. Hello, my name is Alison, and I am personally delighted that we have a session today on housing, because it is the one area throughout my long experience of using services that always seem to be out on the limb, and there are various reasons for that. And I've got a few slides. I was sort of using my privilege as one of the hosts of this to get a chance to present something, because this is something I really care about. At least in the CARE Act defines housing as one of 9 areas of well-being. So at least no longer does the policy think that housing is something that's out on a limb. In legislation, these days we do acknowledge that housing is a significant factor when we're looking at health and well-being. And oops, I'm not very good at the technology here. This is why. This is one of the figures I found regarding the cost to the NHS of poor housing. Now, these are my actual mushrooms. These are mushrooms this is my ceiling, and these are my mushrooms. The damp conditions I was living in very much impacted on my health. It impacted on my overall recovery. Therefore, it impacted on my ability to work, etc., etc., etc. It was definitely a huge factor in very many of my admissions to hospital. I'm delighted to see that at last we're starting to recognise this, that right now we can't afford this kind of cost either financially or the cost in human terms of this kind of thing. Now that's the policy, we're recognising it at that level. However, this is a quote from a housing officer in the borough, in the local authority, not a Family Mosaic housing officer, I should say, who are joining me for this session. This was actually something that stuck with me. She said, "We don't deal with people, we deal with bricks and mortar." So while that attitude prevails, then it's little wonder that there has been this kind of lack of integration. I always felt that social care wasn't that connected to health, but that housing was somewhere on a completely different planet altogether. I think people are kind of sick of hearing my story, really. But, I had a career as an active member of my community. I had a career in international relations, and then my colleagues were killed. And I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I medicated with alcohol. So I ended up very much living in chaos. I lost my health, I lost my home, I lost my career, and my identity, because very much, who we are is defined by what we do. And I was basically, as Edgar Kahn would have put it, a throwaway person. And this became my alternative identity. These are kind of, if you start, I must get somebody who can actually count, because I can't very well, to count out how much this actually cost. All these repeated admissions to hospital, very many of those admissions connected to totally unsuitable housing, and never actually being asked what my priorities were, what would actually work for me. If I'd have actually been asked at any point, I could have made compromises. I'm more than capable of understanding about budgets and all sorts of things, but just this I was never asked. So it was very much a revolving door in and out of hospital. And obviously, in the hierarchy of needs, it's really important to have a stable place to live, and I just didn't have that for a very, very long time. Very often I had excellent care. I had excellent care from individual services, but they weren't connected. So I fell through the gaps. I fell through the gaps repeatedly and repeatedly. So I spent some time on the streets. I'm really getting trigger happy with my slides here. Right. This is actually, I wasn't able, I tried to go there to take a photograph, but I got kind of overwhelmed with the emotion of it, so I found this photograph online. I slept in this car park. This is Kensington Town Hall. I always slept in like the posher areas. So there's a door to the left on the picture here, and there's a stairwell, and that stairwell is where I slept. And you had to be, and this is like, sounds like a sob story, but actually it's because I fell through the gap between services, and I even spent a year as a bed blocker because of lack of safe accommodation. And this overall, because I'm a very able person, really, I ran a major international projects around Chernobyl. I'm a Russian speaker. I had all these abilities and all these things that I thought defined me as a person. And the experience of this horrible energy sapping revolving door over and over and over again, it led to this, what I call an assets freeze. So if you think about an assets freeze like this, that goes on across the whole system, it is something that we cannot afford to go on. It's this disconnection from anything positive, for just being a set of problems to be solved. And I internalized a lot of the stigma. There is a lot of it about. Here's a classic. I wonder if we have any Daily Express readers with us today. But some of that stuff, you know, I tried not to read it, but in, you know, in a cafe, there'd be the Daily Mail, you know, they're like, oh, and I started to stigmatize myself. I would read that stuff and think I have no useful future whatsoever. Had I been asked, now this is something that I did for CITRA, the umbrella body for housing care and support. They, with personalisation, that they advise their members to get people to do this. This is something you can do with clients, customers. I know you use the word customers in housing. I'm not so keen on that because, believe you me, there's been very little choice involved, so I actually don't like being called a customer. These are the things that defined me at the time. These are things that were said about me in rehab. I particularly like strong, thoughtful, beautiful, funny, intellectual, etc., etc., but sometimes need to kick up the proverbial. So they knew me in rehab, put it that way. But this is the what mattered to me thing, but that nobody ever asked me. And then, you know, I got involved in resident engagement with my old housing association. I was on a national board with them, but it still was quite tokenistic. And then I found out about co-production, and we've been talking about this all day, really, which is fantastic, that this is about equal and reciprocal relationships, whereby people using services, and that includes housing, become agents of change. These are the core values of genuine co-production, and I know that Family Mosaic, who are coming on after me, are putting this in practice. I love that they say they're not there yet, because that's always a really good sign. It's when you think you've got it sussed that you probably haven't. And it's about basically a new way of looking at services the people that involve citizens we are experts in that, you know, in where we live now. We've got a number of very active residents in my house, and hopefully we'll be joined by one of those, my neighbour Clancy, in a bit to hear what he has to say. And you know, it's starting to happen. It's very, very slow, but it's very, very heartening to hear that Family Mosaic, who are my landlord, they are doing some very exciting stuff around this. And this is, I love this quote from co-production. It isn't easy. It does take courage. It's you know, in housing, when I hear about the impact of cuts, I hear about the benefit cap and things like supported housing. You know, it's a challenging time in housing, as it is in health. So that is why it's even more urgent that we work in new ways, and that we find innovative ways of working together, so that it doesn't cost so much in terms of money, but it also doesn't lead to that assets freeze, which is very, very dehumanizing, I can tell you. So I'm going to stop waffling on, and we should have, I believe, with us now Helen Watson from Family Mosaic.
I think I think it's going to be Chris.
Is it Chris? Right. Then we have Chris Barker. Do we have anyone?
Hi.
Have we got
yes,
anyone?
Hi. Hi there.
Can I just talk about my ceiling for a bit?
Do I have control of the slides?
Do we have? Is anyone online?
Ask the presenter right.
Could I get the presenter rights to the slides, please?
Can you do that, Joe?
Okay. How do I make it?
Just tap on the right side of the screen.
Hi, Helen. Chris has got the
technical problem.
presenter right. Yeah.
With you in a second. Sorry about this. Just trying to bring up the slides.
Yeah, don't worry, Chris. It's Helen here. You've got presenter rights.
Okay.
So you can move them along now at the top of the screen.
Sure. Well, I'm going to go outside because I can't actually see them on my screen.
Okay, I can see. Yeah.
So thanks for that, Alison. It was really interesting points there.
Oh look, I discovered I can move them on. I've still got so I'll move there.
So just a bit of introduction to me, really. My name's Chris Barker, and I work for a care support director as part of the business development team. And really, the aim of my role is around helping people who use services to have more of a voice and utilise their skills and interests and abilities to help develop services, but also to develop themselves and to work on their own skills and develop more of a sense of identity that might have been lost, like Alison just mentioned. So what I'm going to cover in my part of the presentation is how we try to move away from involvement to more genuine co-production and move on to some of the trappings that we had around customer involvement. What we've learned from things like our employment schemes and how it's benefited our co-production agenda, moving on to talk about more mental health peer support and how that's and how that's really helped to shape our co-production model and some of the successes around that and where we want to go next. And then I want to sort of finish on some personal reflections around what helps and hinders co-production, and there'll be some chance for some comments and some questions there at the end too. So just to sort of set the scene really in terms of where we come from, I think like a lot of people in our line of work, we had a sort of customer involvement agenda, and that agenda, whilst there were some good intentions and to do some good work, a lot of that agenda was driven from our funders and our regulators, and they used to come out and visit us every few years and sort of want to see lots of evidence of things that we've done, and a lot of those things were around policy reviews and panels and forums and involving interviews. And I think those things were really good, and they kept customer involvement and getting people involved in a meaningful way on the agenda, but sometimes a lot of those activities got a bit samey, a bit dry and a bit stifled really. And whilst there's some really good areas of good practice, I think just like the enthusiastic staff, they weren't really working and they were quite inconsistent, and it felt like a tick box exercise. So I kind of personally quite glad that in the last few years things seem to have moved on a little bit, and we're trying to do some more creative things that really tap into people's skills and abilities that they might not have used for a while or haven't realised that they've got. And I sort of see our role as around kind of identifying what those things are and focusing on what's wrong with people and what's wrong. So when I first started my role about 2 or 3 years ago, I was into the organisation and wanted to find out what sort of things we've been doing, what was working well. And at the time we had a scheme to get 1,000 people into work over 3 years, which we were just about on the cusp of achieving. And that to me was really interesting, and I went out and talked to some staff who've been involved in delivering that project, but also people who had experience of being our service users and had gone on to do training and had been given apprenticeships to work alongside our staff. And what was involved in that was that people would do like a 2-month placement in different projects and attend college 1 day a week, and then they were guaranteed an interview for a role at the end of it. And most people who completed that program went on to try and do some work with us. So I had a chance to talk to them about what worked well as part of that process and what didn't work well, which was really, really interesting. And what I found was that barriers had started to really be broken down between staff and the people who used our services, and that the integration was more organic and kind of less contrivability, because quite often we would go out and talk to people, or we would send them a survey, and we would get, we'd get some good responses, or we'd get, good percentages in terms of being a good provider. 97% of our service users would say that they were happy with their support, but it was kind of a bit empty, that information, really. So the information that we got from people who were working alongside our staff and discussing things in a more organic way was just much more fruitful, I guess. So I really wanted to build on that, and I thought it was really good that we were getting tenants back into the workplace, but was aware that there were some quite major health inequalities. So when I looked at the Office of National Statistics data back in 2011, it showed that the two most disadvantaged groups and least likely to be in employment were people with profound learning disabilities and those with mental health problems. So with people with mental health problems, I think it was about 14.2% of people who are working age who are actually in employment, which is incredibly low, really. So I was really determined to build on that good work that was done around getting people into employment and expand that out to people who have mental health problems. So we thought a good opportunity would be to go down the peer support route. There was lots of people across the country in the UK start to do things like that, and building on some of the knowledge from countries like the US and New Zealand, who are kind of much more ahead of the UK, really. So we sat down and developed a working group and tried to work out what our aims would be, and we agreed that those were to develop more recovery-focused services, to have meaningful co-production and to address some of those employment inequalities, but also to have more neutrality between staff and service users, and to kind of break down this divide and make the kind of the discussions we have more organic, as I said. So we also want to look at some of the parameters around that. So I think that there are quite a lot of organisations in the country that develop peer support as a part of a volunteering offer, and we tried to decide whether that was the right approach or whether people should be paid, and we decided that we would like to get people on our payroll and lots of the proper work opportunities, and there to be a proper pathway between being recruited onto the training, doing the training, and then coming out the other side. And then the next stage for us was to try and develop a partnership with a training organisation, because we didn't have that experience within the organisation. And we looked at a couple of different providers and decided in the end to go with the Institute of Mental Health. We felt that they had an excellent reputation in providing a co-produced approach. A lot of the people that deliver that training or have designed the training have got lived experience personally, but also have got experience of working in the mental health sector in the UK, so lots of really valuable knowledge. We also felt that we wanted the training to be accredited, and we decided to go at quite a challenging level. So the course was actually accredited with the Open University Level 4 and ran for 11 days, which involved people completing a 3,000 word assignment. So we recruited 16 people onto that course and ran it back in 2014 in one of our London schemes. So with there being sort of quite a lot involved in that in terms of the assignment and attending all 11 days, we recognised that it was going to be quite emotional and academic testing. So I was asked to be a course supervisor, and what was involved with that was that I attended all the days myself. I also was a link in sort of being able to answer anyone's inquiries or any trouble that they had outside of the course, or if they were struggling, then they could come to me, and I was kind of part of that shared journey, really. And I was also given the chance to complete the assignment and write all the essays and everything. So that was quite exciting for me, because I was really able to put myself in the shoes of the people that were actually attending the course. And what I found was that actually helped us really build trust and develop a really neutral dynamic. And being sort of the attendees co-student, I was really able to make sure that everyone got through the course, and we had some really good outcomes from that. So out of 16 people who started the course, 15 people finished, and 14 people achieved their curriculum, which I think is sort of a high percentage, really, given what was expected of them. So we were really pleased with that outcome. And from there, people were able to take on a variety of roles of our organisation. Some of them were paid roles, and some of them were voluntary, and mainly focused around delivering services to people who want to develop their own recovery plan. But also, we looked at how people might be involved in the project further. So 3 or 4 people who had been on the training had either had some experience delivering training before or had the ambition to. So it was really good to work with those people around how we might co-produce our own training after the IMH left us and sort of finish the course. So from there, I worked with 2 or 3 people who were interested in training, and we thought it would be really important to continue our journey of shared learning. So we went to a local college, and I had some background in training but no qualifications, so we all sat our qualifications together. And again, it was just a really good way to build trust, and to me it just took our kind of dynamic from being co-students to colleagues, really, I guess. And after delivering the course, we were able to sit down and start writing training together and really deliver it together. And I feel that process was very, very mutual and very equal, because I was able to kind of give parts of the training out that other people had more experience and more kind of background in, and were able to write presentations or able to design exercises that highlighted certain parts of the course that we wanted to cover. So from there, we ran another course, and we recruited 10 people into that, and again, have had some really good outcomes, and people who have recently been taking up roles who finished that course. So other things that I've involved people in who've been on that training, facilitating workshops for staff. We're trying to move to a model where we're trying to get staff to think about their own wellbeing and develop resilience and wellbeing tools. So we're currently writing a one-day training course based around kind of wellness planning, and that'll be for staff or for customers. And we're really keen that we don't just kind of define training for one group or the other. So rather than designing a course for people who use services and another one for staff, we want to offer it to both groups, really. And we've had a bit of experience with that. We've had some really good feedback around that kind of being quite a fresh way of delivering training, and that kind of shared learning and shared journey together. So I just want to finish really by sharing some ideas about what I think helps and what hinders co-production. So the things that I think help are shared learning and shared experiences, shared responsibility, and focusing what's strong. Things that I think hinder co-production are preconceived solutions. So perhaps when you go into a consultation or try to get ideas from people about what training should look like, and you've kind of had a really strong idea about what you want that training to look like, and you're just looking for their sign-off. I really don't think that works. I think it's very tokenistic. So the other things that I think hinder are around a kind of a hierarchical structure, and it has to be very even. And I think by attending things like group training together, staff and people who use services, that kind of takes down those barriers. And then finally, focusing on what's wrong rather than what's strong. So thinking back to what Alison said in her presentation, and not seeing people as a set of problems to be solved, but seeing all of their talents and abilities. That's me. I don't know if anyone's got any comments about what helps or what hinders, or if you have any questions.
That was fantastic. I'm really encouraged to hear. And what strikes me is that just goes to show exactly the same issues that are coming up, and it's housing. So it's not, you know, housing has been out on a limb for so long, and there's absolutely no reason for that, because these issues about the importance of shared learning, the difficulties of hierarchy, etc., the assets-based stuff around focusing on what's wrong, it's all exactly the same. So there's more that actually unites us than divides us. So that's absolutely great. Shall we continue now? Shall we go on, and then we can round up at the end and see what kind of we're hearing from the chat room then. Is that all right with you?
Perfect.
Are you? Is it Ben now?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Oh, it's reached a point in the day where I'm not even sure what my own name is, never mind anyone else. Hi, Ben. I'm going to hand over to you, and hopefully you can now have presenters' rights. Is that how this techie thing works?
Give it a go, see if it works.
Yeah, give it a whirl, see if it appears. Have you got it yet? Can we hand over to Ben Webb?
It's telling me I'm presenting.
You've got it? Right. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you. Okay, so as a bit of a background about me as well, I guess, I also work for Family Mosaic, and I'm the team manager for our health and wellbeing research project, of which we have two, but today specifically I'm going to talk about Get Healthy, Get Active, which kind of fits the theme a little bit. We're running through mental health, as Chris was talking about some of the mental health customers he works with. And this project was working with our mental health customers in Hackney. So as a very kind of quick bit about the project, it was a randomised control trial that we ran. It was run with our customers in Hackney, all suffered from a serious mental health problem, and all were currently receiving service or support from Family Mosaic. So really where we're going for this is the service. There was voluntary participation. We were using it to try and identify how we could provide services to help improve the physical and nutritional health of customers suffering from a serious mental health problem. Evidence we know has shown that the life expectancy of those with a serious mental health problem is reduced by around 25 years on average. So it's quite a serious kind of situation that we can find them in, and it's important that we start to recognise how we can help them, but importantly how they can impact how we're helping them and what we can do to support them through that journey. So we decided to run a randomised control trial, the reason being that gives us some really strong evidence about whether or not it's the work that we're doing with them that's having the impact, or whether it's the work kind of that other community organisations are doing that is having that impact. So it's all about trying to figure out where the impact is coming from so we can actually work with people in a way that works for them. But that's very much kind of applying support to people. So we wanted to get them involved in the support that we were providing and get their input and their guidance on how they wanted this to be delivered and designed and put together. So the service had a peer worker involved from the very start. So we had two paid members of staff on the project. We had a sports coach who was very typically trained around delivering physical activity sessions, and was a coordinator to coordinate an activity of timetable activity to bring together lots of different activities, both physical and nutritional and social, that would work with these people to improve their physical and nutritional health. But we wanted the peer worker involved because typically it's a hard to engage group of people. So we knew it was going to take a while to kind of gain their trust and gain the momentum of the project to actually have some serious kind of co-production with them in it. So the peer worker was there to help guide it from their own kind of lived experience of mental health and how they'd used physical and nutritional health interventions to improve their health. So they were a paid member of staff. They were in it. There was no kind of hierarchy in that structure. It was the peer worker was there on the same level as everyone else to have input and guidance into exactly how we build that project up to start with, and then we can start shaping it really specifically and tailoring it to the needs of the people. So like I said, they provided insight through the lived experience, and they were really invaluable in kind of setting up the initial stages of how are we going to talk to people, how are we going to build this into something that's successful. Which leads us on to the customers, I guess. We had 300 that were invited to take part. Of the 300 we invited, 84 voluntarily came forward to take part. And we also had one that had completed Chris's peer worker course, who actually ended up taking quite a nice leading role in the project alongside the employed peer worker specifically attached to the project. So I'll come on to that in a little bit. So the co-production, how did that kind of happen in this in this project. So like I said, we had the peer worker at the beginning to kind of help design and shape the initial phases of how we were going to deliver this. And one thing that we really picked up from her that was structure was very, very key. She needed a lot of structure, a lot of kind of knowing what to expect and when to expect it. Otherwise, it's all just too much to take on. So we developed a timetable that ran on a rolling 6-week schedule. So the first week of that was always consultation. It was always talking to people, finding out what it is they wanted to do, and then designing the timetable based on that work that we'd done with people. And then we had 3 to 4 solid weeks of feedback, and then we'd release the timetable, and we'd repeat that every 6 weeks. So people always knew that at week 1 there was going to be a consultation phase. At week 2 we were always going to put the timetable together based on that consultation. And then for the following weeks we talked to them in a social way, not kind of typical forums where you're sitting in a room asking people, what do you think, what do you want to do? It was on the minibus while we went to football. It was, you know, as we're playing games, talking to them about exactly what it was. And like Chris said, it's focusing on what's strong, not what's wrong. So what is it that you're good at and you want to carry on doing, and how can we help you with that? So we learned from customers through talking to them, the important points to make this work were the location of where we had these interventions, that critically, ideally, they wanted the activities between 11 AM and 3 PM. So after 3 PM, people started taking their medication for the night. Lots of those medications had a sedative effect, which after they've taken medication, knocks them out for the night, and then they're not really back to kind of really wanting to get going again until 11 AM. So although we knew they took their medications in the evening, we hadn't realised actually their mindset at about 3 o'clock is starting to go towards, I need to get back from my medication. So it may be that they take medication at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, but around 3 o'clock, that's starting to become a priority to them. So we needed to fit this project into those windows so that it actually worked with them. Structure, like I said, was really important. Competition was massive. They really wanted a competitive environment where they could compete amongst themselves with others, and that's really kind of what got them going. Transport was exceptionally important, but not for the typical reason of I need transport to take me from A to B, but also because transport's a really good place to socialise. It's a really exciting place for them to sit and talk about and plan the football match they're going to and decide the teams and have a discussion. And groups are important as well. One of the things we noticed with groups and that we got feedback on, and that kind of developed the way we did things, is actually groups in mental health schemes aren't that helpful, particularly for people that have graduated from that mental health scheme. They don't want to go back. They've kind of gone past that stage in their recovery, and they don't want to be going back to that mental health scheme. They want to be going to a leisure centre or a local field or somewhere that isn't taking a step backwards as they see it. Music was really important. Recognition of achievements was really important. So we had gold, silver and bronze award for attendance to recognise how well they'd attended particular sessions. But then on top of that, we had top team players and most improved to really recognise kind of all the aspects of the things they were doing. Food was always a big one, mainly because everybody likes food and it's good to get together and eat food. And the little one in the middle that catches everyone out is yams. Why are yams so important? And that's kind of where we really learned something big. Was we had a nutritionist come in and we'd got this typical kind of, we're going to cook a healthy meal on a Monday and we'll teach you and you can learn, and then you can cook it on the Friday. But it was an English nutritionist who didn't really know a lot about yams, and a lot of the culture of the people that were attending these classes was they ate a lot of yams. So we actually had to go away and go back to the drawing board and say, all right, how on earth do we cook yams in a really healthy way that's still got the flavours and the smells that you're used to in your kind of cultural environment? So that was a really big learning curve for us. We went at them with kind of healthy pizzas and healthy spaghetti bolognese, and it turned out really what we needed to learn to cook was healthy yams. So that's kind of one of our favourite things. And on top of all of that, once we'd kind of worked with customers to design this core set of activities and programs that they could attend, we then sat down with them and did a health action plan. And health action plan was about that person very specifically. And it was talking to them about, all right, a bit like a one-page profile, but about health specifically. So what would you like to change about your health, if anything? how long would you like to do that in? What's the really, really big goal? Is it you want to go on holiday, or is it that you want to be able to run down the street or run a marathon? But, all right, they're really big, fantastic goals, but how do we help you reach them on a really micro level? So we could say within the next week, we're going to eat one more green piece of fruit. And that's, you know, trying to help them identify things that they're really keen on achieving and just helping them achieve those in really small kind of manageable steps, rather than saying, right, you need to do this, let's take one huge step and then tell you you failed in 6 months when you haven't actually managed to run a marathon. When actually we could go back with you and look at all these things that you said you wanted to achieve and all these fantastic results that you actually made over the course of 6 weeks, 6 months to a year, and here's all those teeny tiny little steps that you actually had some strength in and not some weakness. Oh, gone one too far there. So, like I said, we know we're not there. We know we haven't got it 100% right. And that's part of what this project is about, is now looking at some of the data that we've got and the initiatives that we use, and to make this something that's got a bit of a legacy that can carry on and influence what we do on a broader scale across the organisation. So we're collecting the final data and collating it at the moment so it can be analysed by our research team. And we're going to have some fairly in-depth kind of conversations with people about exactly what it is that they think works. So we know we've got data. Data's great. It gives you kind of lots of ins to interesting conversations, but the data may be lying and it may actually be something else that we really want to find out from the customers. So we're continuing that work. We're continuing talking to the customers. And we've got some peer workers that were involved in the project that are now carrying on the activities while we come up with how we integrate this on a broader scale. The legacy is really through consultation with the customers, with the people that we work with, about how do you want this to be kind of put together. We kind of have some ideas about what it is we'd like to do and what we think worked, but really the important thing is that it works for you, and how do we build that into the support that we provide you. And that's the end goal, is that we integrate this into our support model and deliver that to everybody. And that's it from me.
That's fantastic. Do we have Clancy around? That was absolutely fantastic. There was great stuff there. I love the thing about the yams. I'm going to remember that. So is Clancy with us? I don't seem to see him on the list.
I'm just checking now, Alison.
It's Keith Clancy. Yeah, he was there before.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just about, Clancy. Can't see you though.
Oh.
Never mind.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can just. I will just move the slide along if I'm able to do that. Yeah, here we go. Clancy, I've just put up a slide of the outside of our house.
Right.
Looking very tidy, and none of the strange people in our area are hanging in the doorways. And the other picture next to that is of our famous resident, Ambassador Yi Hanung, in his lovely Victorian jacket, obviously when he was on one of his better days. I should explain that Clancy is a member of the board, a resident member of the board of Family Mosaic. He also happens to be one of my neighbours and a friend, so he's joined us today. We have quite quirky residents, and I'm certainly including myself in that. And I think that just the kind of the range of people that we have in our building, it kind of challenges some of the assumptions that people make about social housing. Our building was an embassy in the Victorian times, and this is who lived there. He was an ambassador of Korea, and he took his own life. So he had mental health problems. The resident where I live was the neighbour, who were the Vaughan Williams family, the composer. They kept a diary, and they described basically his depression, and they could see him. So, you know, and this is 1903, took his own life. So we have quite an interesting building. So that, but I wanted to have something quite quirky up for when Clancy's talking, because well, Clancy will explain himself. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Clancy. It'll be lovely to hear your voice.
Okay, so can you hear me clearly, Alison?
I can, yes.
Great. Okay, so can I first of all thank everybody on the Transformathon team because you're doing an incredible job. And can I thank everyone from Stanford University for getting behind this? It's wonderful news. And can I thank my colleagues at Family Mosaic for being such an excellent crew, Helen, Chris, and Ben. So thanks very much for all of that. Housing associations, for those around the world who don't know what they are a non-for-profit housing system that happens in the United Kingdom. They're basically private, very large charities, some of which have got in excess of 100,000 houses, which they rent out at as low a rent as they possibly can to people in society, mainly key workers, mainly people who have come from a homeless background or have got some other form of disadvantage. I went blind very slowly and very horribly with a disease called CRB1, and that has been an incredible challenge for me down through the last 25 years of my life. So I didn't go blind where my eyesight became dark, as everyone expects. I went blind where if you put both of the thumbs in your eyes and you press really hard, then you will see all these flashing light colors appearing in your vision, and those flashing lights were what started appearing in my eyes more and more and more, and then over 25 years, everything else disappeared, and I was left with just them. So now I have 24-hour vision of incredibly bright lights flashing in my eyes all day long. And you can imagine that is one serious mental challenge. So facing up to that is not easy. Now, I live in this great building with Alison. This building was the Korean embassy, as she said, in 1905 when it was handed back after the then ambassador killed himself due to something that was happening between Korea, Russia, and England at the time. And it was bought. The building was bought by housing association in the 1960s, when there wasn't a great deal of money in London post-Second World War, and these buildings were becoming decrepit, and they were bought by these large charities and then turned into usable buildings again. So a lot of the area was preserved. A lot of this very posh area was preserved by charities who looked after the buildings. There wasn't them. And so part of looking after these buildings is that they're now full of residents, and these organizations, housing associations, have become extremely large, and they are doing their best to keep their sort of sense of social purpose and all the rest of it. But over time, as institutions that get very, very, very large do, they become a landlord, and your situation, your relationship becomes a landlord and a tenant rather than a member of a gigantic social movement which is about housing people with disadvantage. So trying to keep the values, trying to keep that separate spiritual and social aspect to the work of these housing associations, you can imagine is a really difficult task. The National Health Service has got the same thing in England, and it has a real deep, massive social purpose, but the bureaucracy of it at times gets in the way, and running the machine, it becomes harder than keeping the social values together at the same time. So our building lost a bit of its flair, and it was time for it to be done up. And co-production, me being a person who's of somewhat flamboyant appearance and very artistic, even though people don't understand that when you're going blind, they don't understand that you can be creative. When you've got 24 hours a day flashing bright light colors in your brain, you tend to think about color an awful lot. You tend to be fantastically creative in terms of design inside your own imagination, because that's what your reality is. So you mess around with the colors that you're seeing in your head, and you think, oh, what would this look good at? Would this look wonderful in a room? Would this look great on a shirt? How would this look good? And those co-production ideas that were in my head to say, hey, we're doing up our building, were not necessarily in the head of Family Mosaic. who its turn was to do up our building and to refurbish it. Legally, they had the responsibility to do it up. So I went marching in with my big feet and said, hey, wouldn't it be wonderful if we did this really respectful stuff to this fantastic building? It's got all of this history with the previous owner was the first parliamentary secretary in the area, and it was an embassy, and then it went into hard times, and it had women of disrepute in it, and it had this and it had that, and it's got a great history. And they said, look, mate, we need to paint the walls and we need to, fix the door, and that's about it. So then I came back to them with a much more thought-through process, which was to say, our building has got social issues in it. It's got some quite old and vulnerable people in it. And it's also got some vulnerable people in it, and not so old, like me, who's going blind. And we have had issues with the fact that our door has been broken for the last 2 years, and people have been using our building, as a building to have illicit sex, because we had quite a lot of prostitutes in the area of both genders, and people were using it to get away from the cameras on the streets, where the police had put up lots of cameras to stop drug dealers and prostitution, and they'd moved into our building by keeping our front doors completely locked broken so they could come in, and unobserved from the cameras outside, to do what they please. And you can imagine, being people who were quite vulnerable, you didn't tend to challenge a guy if he's trying to sell some cocaine in your front hall. So through this discussion with Family Mosaic, we started to get into a co-production idea, and then what happened was we completely redesigned the building in a very, very inexpensive way. We just put up some super elegant wallpaper which matched the building. We put some flower pots outside. We just made it look really, really super. And I had a hand in designing the hallway that people who were partially sighted could walk down it in a very easy way without injuring themselves, because you can organize the colors in a certain way. So we did that, and that was a great success. And when I was visiting the doctor very soon after that, which is about 10 minutes walk from my house, I met a man who lived in the building opposite me. He was a very wealthy guy who'd been living in a hotel for many years because he was so old. And he insisted, being a man of great generosity and of 90 years old, that he would walk me back to my building to help me as a blind person. It usually takes me about 10 minutes to walk back from there. With him and his age disability, it took us about 45 minutes, which sort of hampered my day a little bit. But anyway, we did get to talk to each other, and he did get the experience of feeling that he was doing a lot of good for me. And one of the great stories that he told me on that journey home was, he said, on the street that you and I live on, and I'm like, yes, he said, there was a building opposite from me, and it was a dreadful building. It was full of really terrible people. And I said, really? And he said, yes. And he told me the name of the building, and it just happened to be my building. And I said, oh, okay. So what happened? And he said, well, then some very nice people came along, and they refurbished the building, and they made it look very pretty. And I said, great. And he said, yes. And then they took all of those horrible people that were living in the building, and they moved them all to Manchester. And I said, gosh, that's how fascinating. And he said, yes, and now it's full of new people who are very respectful and very nice, and they've even got some lovely flowers on the front doorstep, geraniums, and they're red, and they're very nice. And I said, wow, isn't that extraordinary how things can change? And he said, yes, that, it just goes to show that you need the right people living in your area, or your area is going to go downhill. And I said goodbye to him, and he said goodbye to me in an extraordinarily pleasant time we'd had together, and he went into his building. I went into my refurbished building, which is the same building Alison and I have been living in before the decorations and after the co-production decorations. And not one person in the building had moved out or moved to Manchester. We were all exactly the same people, all exactly wearing exactly the same clothes and behaving in exactly the same way. The difference was we've now been listened to by our landlord, who agreed to do a co-production with us, who made the building with our help look fantastic, and we made it more secure, and we put some internal cameras, and now nobody comes in here to pay for sex or to sell drugs, because they look at the front of the building and they think, oh, we can't go in there, it's too posh, let's go somewhere else. Anyway, the moral of the story is that the co-production design of our building has done Family Mosaic an enormous amount, because it saved them a lot of money, and it saved us a great deal of stress and a nicer place to live.
Absolutely, Clancy. You've said it all really. I do love that story. I've heard it a few times now, and I absolutely love it. And it is true. It's just, you know, the whole thing around attitudes towards people in social housing, that we're somehow just, you know, the scroungers and blah 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 blah, you know, and it's difficult not to buy into that when you are living in a house but now, you know, at least people feel that they have some sense of genuine ownership over the building, and you know, they get very, very fired up about stuff now, about colour schemes and God knows what else. But that's a good thing, you know. It's a good thing, because you know, it's easy just to be, when you're a passive recipient, it's just to sit back and let it happen to you rather than be part of it. I'm afraid time's marched on, but I'm really glad that you guys could join us. But I'm afraid we're going to have to bring that session to an end. I just really feel that the I Hanung, our esteemed former resident, will be very, very glad that he's had a mention on this afternoon. So thanks very much, and I hope the building's still in one piece, so that there'll be somewhere for me to come home to tomorrow.